He was in more than 100 movies, won an Oscar, and marched with Martin Luther King Jr. These brave men knew that their signatures on the Declaration of Independence told everyone that they were ready to die for it. But in his last interview, Charlton H. said something that made Peter cringe. At age 77, the actor who played Moses said, "My life will be over soon." He said this while his wife of 60 years was by his side. Hollywood's toughest hero admitted that his mind was slipping away, and the crew was so shocked that they couldn't continue filming. No one knew what to say to the man who had once been the most powerful voice in America. Charlton H. was born as John Charles Carter on October 4, 1923, in Cook County, Illinois. His birth certificate was filed 11 days later, but it listed him as Charlton Carter instead. In his autobiography, he wrote that he was born in Evanston, but most official records say he was born in Wilmette. This caused some early confusion about his past, but of course that is true. He spent his childhood in the woods of St. Helens, Michigan. It was a quiet and lonely place where he went hunting and fishing almost every day and later called himself a skinny hick from the woods. By 1930, census records already showed his name as Charlton J. Carter, even though the usual people who knew him well say that he changed his name later in life. In 1933, when he was 10, his parents got divorced and his mother later married Chester H. That's when he took the H name. Most people thought that Charlton came from his mother's maiden name, but that's not true. It came from his grandmother, Marion Charlton. His mother and aunt were adopted by their grandfather when they were young, and they took his last name to avoid their biological father. As H got older and more famous, his nickname never changed. He started acting in movies when he was 17 years old in 1941 in Peer Gynt. It was a silent movie, which was strange because sound movies had been around since the late 1920s. His younger brother Alan also had a small part in the movie. It wasn't a big production, but it was brave. It used Norwegian music and tried to stay true to the play. One critic later said, "The silence gave it a haunting feel." Even Charlie Chaplin had moved on from silent films by then. He started at Northwestern University in the spring of 1941 and met Lydia Clark in a theater class. He was shy and poor, and he worked long hours. He ran elevators at night and did any job he could find during the day. Despite all of that, he noticed Lydia, and they fell in love right away. On March 17, 1944, they got married in Greensboro, North Carolina, and stayed together for 64 years until he died in 2008. They raised 2 children, Fraser Clark H. and Holly H. Rochelle, even when film projects kept calling them away. Even when they were apart, they stayed close. He once said that he was more in love with her after 9 years of marriage than he was on their wedding day. His TV career began on March 15, 1949, when he appeared on Suspense. A few months later, on June 15, 1949, he made his debut on Studio One. That show gave him the chance to play complicated roles, like Edward Rochester in Jane Eyre on December 12, 1949, Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights on October 30, 1950, and McBTH on October 22, 1951. These roles helped him get noticed by CBS. Studio One got more money and better sets than other shows. Some people thought H was stiff at first, but others noticed his presence and strong voice and thought he stood out. By 1955, the show was getting more than 500 scripts every week, and H was becoming a serious actor. When Betty Davis says it, you know it's true, but I think I won this award for doing chores that a lot of other people do too. But because I'm an actor, they take my picture when I do them. In 1950, he took on 2 big projects. He played Mark Anthony in a low-budget film version of Julius Caesar. He was the only paid actor in that Chicago production, which was directed by an old friend from his youth. His big Hollywood debut was in Dark City, where he played Danny Haley, a bitter gambler who ran an illegal bookie joint. He was 25 years old at the time. The movie wasn't a big hit, but director Cecil B. Dale saw it and liked him, so he cast him in The Greatest Show on Earth in 1952. He played Braddon, a tough circus manager with a soft side. Critics said he brought the movie won the Oscar for Best Picture, and H proved that he could play the lead in a major movie. In 1954, he was in 2 adventure movies. The first was The Naked Jungle, in which he played Christopher Langan, a plantation owner who had to deal with a marriage problem and a plague of army ants. Director Byron Haskin used groundbreaking special effects for the ant scenes, and critics praised the movie for showing sexual tension between H and co-star Eleanor Parker. Right after that, H flew to Peru for Secret of the crew of 16 people worked with 500 local extras to film Incas. He played Harry Steele, a treasure hunter looking for a lost artifact. This role later inspired Indiana Jones. The movie also brought a lot of tourists to Peru. Later that same year, Dale started looking for actors to play the 10 Commandments. At first, he wanted William Boyd, who played Hopalong Cassidy, but Boyd turned it down because he had other work commitments. Dale then looked at Jeff Chandler, Dan Dolly, Kirk Douglas, and even Rock Hudson. Hudson's big break came when the Israeli government sent Dale a sculpture of Michelangelo's Moses. When he saw how much he looked like Hudson, it helped him make up his mind, even though he still had doubts. In his diary, Dale wrote that Hudson wasn't very attractive, but he still gave him the part. There was one last surprise. Hudson's son, Fraser, had just been born, and producer Henry Willaxin suggested using him as baby Moses in the basket scene. Hudson agreed, and Dale ended up in 1956. He was no longer just an actor. He had become the face of biblical epics and one of the most powerful figures on screen. When MGM started planning Ben-Hur in the late 1950s, it was already going to be the biggest and most expensive movie Hollywood had ever made. But it took a long time and a lot of trouble to find the right actor for the lead role. Charlton H. wasn't even close to being at the top of the list. The studio first offered the part to Burt Lancaster. He turned it down because he thought the script was dull and even offensive to Christians. Then they tried Paul Newman, but he had just been in The Silver Chalice, a biblical movie that didn't do well. Newman was embarrassed by it and didn't want to do another one. He even joked that he didn't have the legs to wear a Roman costume. Marlon Brando also turned it down. The studio kept trying. They looked at Rock Hudson, even though some at MGM didn't think he could handle the role. At one point, they even thought about casting Leslie Nielsen, who wasn't known for comedy yet, and nothing worked. MGM got so desperate that they started looking at Italian actors who didn't even speak English. That's when director William Wyler found Charlton H. Holiday, who played Moses in the 10 Commandments in 1956. Holiday had the voice, the presence, and the good looks to lead a Roman chariot. The production was huge. The chariot race alone cost $1 million, took 5 weeks to film over 3 months, and covered more than 200 miles of real track. As soon as he got to Rome, he practiced driving a chariot for 3 hours every day. He had to learn how to control the horses and make the turns. Dirt would fly into his eyes, so he wore special contacts to protect them. One of the most famous parts of the race happened during a real accident involving a stuntman named Joe Cutt, whose father was the famous stunt coordinator Yakima Cutt. During one jump, Cutt was thrown high into the air and hit hard, hurting his chin, but surviving. Wyler used that real footage in the final film, cutting it together with other footage from the movie. The shot of H climbing back into the chariot became one of the most famous scenes in the movie. The production used 78 trained horses from Yugoslavia and Sicily. H's team had Andalusians and the other teams had Lipitans. When Ben-Hur came out in 1959, it was a big hit at the 32nd Academy Awards, where it won 11 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Actor for H. This set a record that stood for almost 40 years, until Titanic broke it in 1997. H had never won a competitive Oscar before and would never win one again, but this one. From then on, one performance changed everything. He became Hollywood's go-to actor for historical epics. Critics called him the symbol of a time when Hollywood made serious movies with serious heroes. After Ben-Hur, he played El Cid in 1961, Michelangelo in The Agony and the Ecstasy in 1965, and John the Baptist in The Greatest Story Ever Told that same year. Roger Ebert later said that H made at least 3 movies that almost everyone sees at some point, including The 10 Commandments and Planet of the Apes. He turned down a big studio movie with Marilyn Monroe called Let's Make Love in 1960, and instead went to Broadway to work with Laurence Olivier, who was directing a play called The Tumbler by Ben W. Levy. The play opened in Boston and had a rough start, then moved to New York and closed after only 5 performances in February 1960. Time magazine called it harrowingly pretentious, and it was a huge failure, but H said it was worth it. He told a columnist Joe Hames that he learned more from Olivier in 6 weeks than he could have on his own. Later that same year, he worked with Gary Cooper on the thriller The Wreck of the Mary Dear, which was based on a book by Hammond Innes. The story started out as a mystery, but turned into a courtroom drama halfway through. Critics didn't like the change in tone, and one said the ending was the weakest part. The movie still made money, though. MGM Records showed it made $165 million in the US and Canada and $165 million overseas. It cost $206 million to make, so it made a small profit of $200,000. However, it didn't live up to the studio's hopes. H later said that the screenplay didn't capture the power of the novel, and he also blamed director Michael Anderson for not getting the courtroom scenes right. In 1961, H returned to epics with El Cid. The film was shot over 9 months in Spain, and what happened off-screen made H and co-star Sophia Loren famous. They couldn't stand each other. They had great chemistry on screen, but they fought all the time behind the scenes. When producer Samuel Bronston later tried to cast them together again in The Fall of the Roman Empire, H refused. This caused problems for Bronston, and some think it helped his studio go bankrupt. When freedom is in real danger, it's always the patriots who first hear the call. El Cid was a huge hit at the box office. The costumes and weapons were real, and the Spanish army even took part as extras. Bruce made a lot of money from the movie and used it to pay for more epics, but H started to feel trapped. He had played Moses and Ben-Hur, and now he was playing another historical figure. He was afraid that he would be stuck in these roles forever. In 1968, Charlton H's career took a big turn when he was cast in Planet of the Apes. The movie changed how science fiction looked and felt, and the ape makeup was very hard to do. It could take up to 7 hours to put on and 3 hours to take off, which meant that actors had to start working at 2:00 a.m. and stay until 10:00 p.m. John Chambers solved the problem by using foam rubber that let the skin breathe and special paint that didn't block pores. Filming began on May 21, 1967. The studio spent $345,000 on makeup, but told the press it was $1 million. It was hard work. The actors wore full prosthetics in the desert heat and drank through straws to keep their makeup from running off camera. They sat with other actors of the same species, like gorillas sitting with gorillas and orangutans sitting with orangutans. Cinematographer Leon Shamroy built at the same time a satirical article made false claims about H. It said he made inappropriate comments to a stagehand in May 1967 and invited her for drinks. The article even joked that she had nightmares about H in an ape suit. The story was made up, but it was meant to poke fun at cancel culture by looking like real news. In 1971, H starred in The Omega Man, which was based on I Am Legend by Richard Matt. He played a man who was left alone after a pandemic destroyed the world. The movie made $4 million in the US and Canada. Matt said it was a masterpiece. It wasn't even close to his book, but over time it became a cult classic. Tim Burton called it his desert island pick, and said it was the first movie with funny action scenes. Then came Soylent Green in 1973. It took place in a polluted New York with 40 million people, and the world was falling apart because of the greenhouse effect and overpopulation. It was one of the first movies to talk about climate change, and it was based on Harry Harrison's 1966 novel Make Room, Make Room. Harrison didn't like the movie, and Stanley Greenberg, the screenwriter, said so. Cinematographer Richard Kleen used green filters to give the movie a sick, toxic look. In 1974, H starred in Earthquake, which had 141 stunt performers, the most ever. At the time he was 50 years old and still did many of his own stunts. The camera system shook the whole frame to make it look like there were real tremors, and stunt workers were inches away from Sixton concrete blocks. One was knocked out during a flood scene, and another was hurt in an elevator crash. In 1972, Harrison directed Anthony and Cleopatra. Was a dream project. He wanted Orson Welles to direct it, but Welles said no and Han took over. Critics hated the movie. The naval battle used cheap shots from Ben-Hur and looked bad. Han gave himself long close-ups and ignored pacing. The movie bombed and never recovered. Charlton H. wasn't always the conservative icon that many people remember from the 1950s. He was a dedicated Democrat. His first political campaign was in 1956, when he backed Adlai Stevenson against Dwight Eisenhower. Stevenson lost, but H. stayed involved. He backed John F. Kennedy in 1960. By the early 1960s, H. wasn't just a supporter, he took real action. He got involved with civil rights work at a time when most actors didn't. On August 28, 1963, H. marched in Washington, D.C. with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He didn't just stand there, he led the arts group. That day, about 250 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial, including your first vice president, Mr. Charlton H. H. later said it was the most important moment in the civil rights movement. The next year, he called Dr. King a 20th century Moses, which hit home because he had played Moses in the 10 Commandments 7 years before. He knew that calling Dr. King a 20th century Moses could hurt his career, but he didn't back down. He once said, "I marched for civil rights with Dr. King in 1963, and long before Hollywood found it acceptable, I may say he believed democracy only worked if people stood up for it." His words, "If you believe in democracy, you have to believe in how it works." But H's views didn't stay the same. After Robert Kennedy and Dr. King were killed in 1968, he called for stricter gun laws, saying that Congress wasn't doing enough and wanted stronger limits on handguns, shotguns, and rifles. But over time, his views changed. In 1972, while filming The Omega Man, his views started to change. By the late 1990s, he had joined the NRA in 1997 and became its president in 2003. As he stood on stage at the NRA convention in Charlotte in 2000 and raised a gun above his head, he said the now famous words, "From my cold, dead hands." It was a turning point. He became the face of the gun rights movement at a time when Democrats were pulling back from the debate. He saw the change in support for the Second Amendment as a promise kept and a victory for personal freedom. In 1999, he gave a powerful speech at Harvard Law School. It was February 16, and the room was packed. He told the students that they were part of the most politically silent generation in America since the beginning of the Revolution. He said that their silence was a sign of fear. He talked about how words like Negro and Black were used during marches in the 1960s but were now illegal to use in everyday speech. I told him, I don't want to write another book right now, I just sold the last one. I told him I was going to make a movie, but he said no. He then told me the title, and I thought, oh, you got me. He thought this was proof that people could not speak freely anymore. He called it winning the cultural war, and he warned that once people are told what to say, it's easier to tell them what to do. He told the students to stand up to that pressure like Dr. King did, and he said that peaceful protest still mattered. Then, in August 2000, H revealed that he went to rehab earlier that year at a center in Utah from late May to mid-June. He was 76 years old. He told the National Enquirer that he had given up whiskey years before, but had become addicted to drinking too much white wine, which he did on flights and at dinner parties. He said he wasn't slurring or stumbling, but he knew it had become a problem. His publicist, Lisa DiMatteo, said that his schedule was part of the problem because he was starring in the play Love Letters with his wife Lydia, leading the NRA and campaigning. He also said that the negative reviews he got from London critics after his West End show hurt him a lot, but his wife and son finally persuaded him to get help. Charlton and Lydia got married on March 17, 1944, in Greensboro, North Carolina. He was about to leave for the Aleutian Islands with the Air Corps, and Lydia's father thought the marriage would only last 2 weeks. Instead, it lasted 64 years. They had problems together, and he said that being away from her for film shoots and events made him realize how lonely life could be. He was always on time and disorganized, while she was often late and very organized. There were rumors of cheating and fights, but he denied all of it, saying he had loved Lydia since he was 17. He never wanted to put their marriage at risk, so they learned how to handle fights and had a rule: never go to sleep until you've settled an argument. In 1998, while he was having hip surgery, doctors found something unexpected. He had prostate cancer. He was 73 years old. The news came as a shock, but he said it wasn't life-threatening. He put off treatment until he was done with filming and wanted to support Republican candidates in the 1998 election. When he finally started treatment, he went through radiation 5 days a week, starting at 7:00 a.m. He went to therapy, then went to work, and at the same time he was filming Town and Country with Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton. He didn't miss a beat. In 2001, he announced that he was cancer-free, and on August 9, 2002, Charlton H. sat alone on screen. His voice was steady and his eyes were focused. He was 77 years old, and he had played Moses and Ben, or said something much more personal than any role. I'm exercising one of the rights passed down to me from those wise old dead white guys who invented this country. He had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. The video message was recorded just 2 days earlier, on August 7th, in private, without a crowd or the press. His spokesperson, Lisa Powers, later explained that he wanted to get the words just right because he wanted to say them himself from beginning to end. The background was plain and the framing was H's presence was still strong, but this time there was no script and no audience, only truth. He looked into the camera and said, I wanted to prepare a few words for you now because when the time comes I may not be able to. Then he said something even more powerful. I can part the Red Sea, but I can't part with you. He didn't try to hide from what was coming. Instead, he faced it head-on. Even after being told the news, H refused to step away. He said he would stay out of public life right away and continue to be president of the National Rifle Association until April 2003. He also planned to keep speaking at political events as long as he could. Before ending his message, he read lines from Shakespeare's The Tempest from memory. It was a last performance from a man whose life had been built around the stage. 4 months later, in December 2002, he gave what would be his last televised interview. ABC Peter Jennings sat down with him at his home. Lydia, his wife of almost 60 years, stayed by his side. H was already showing signs of change. He spoke more slowly, forgot words, and repeated himself, but he was still aware of what was going on. When Jennings asked him about his illness, H didn't hesitate. He said, "About Alzheimer's, as you know, the problem is not for you, the problem is for everyone around you." He knew what was coming. He spoke quietly but clearly about how long and how well I can keep up my condition as it is now, and when it stops he was afraid of forgetting and not being able to say goodbye, which is why he told everyone about his diagnosis. He said, "I can part the Red Sea, but I can't part with you, which is why I won't exclude you from this stage in my life." After the news came out, a lot of people called to offer their support. Nancy Reagan was one of the first to call, but she didn't ask to speak. She wanted to talk to Lydia because she knew from her own experience that Alzheimer's didn't just affect the person who had it. It also changed everything for the people who cared for them. Charlton H. had Alzheimer's for more than 5 years. He died at home in Beverly Hills on April 5, 2008, at the age of 84. The official cause of death was complications from the disease. He hadn't said much for a while, but the tributes were loud and full of praise. President George W. Bush had given Hahn the Presidential Medal of Freedom during his speech in 2003. Governor Jeb Bush of Florida said that H was a man of character and integrity with a big heart. He talked about H's service in World War II, his work in the civil rights movement, his leadership in the Screen Actors Guild, and his fierce defense of the Second Amendment. Nancy Reagan said she was heartbroken and called him a hero in real life, not just on screen. She said that he had always stood by her husband when H quit the NRA. "It's safe to say my brother may not have been President of the United States." That one line said it all about H's political influence in the 2000 election. His funeral was held on April 12, 2008, at the Episcopal Parish of St. Matthew's in Pacific Palisades, the church where he had worshipped since the early 1980s. About 250 people came, including political and Hollywood stars like Nancy Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Olivia de Havilland, Tom Selleck, Oliver Stone, and many more. Christian Bale, H was cremated after the service, and his ashes were given back to the family he had loved and cared for 64 years.